At precisely 9:58 on the morning of April 8, 1940, Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope stood aboard the bridge of HMS Glowworm, observing an enormous grey form materializing through Norwegian mist. The German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper was bearing down at considerable speed. At 35 years of age, with 5 years commanding destroyer vessels, survival seemed impossible. The Admiral Hipper displaced approximately 14,000 tons and mounted 8 8-inch cannons. HMS Glowworm displaced only 1,350 tons. The German cruiser outmassed the British destroyer by a factor of 10. Every projectile from Hipper's main battery weighed roughly twice as much as anything Glowworm could return. 3 hours prior, Glowworm had been operating independently in heavy seas north of the Norwegian coast. A sailor had fallen overboard 2 days earlier during a powerful storm. Roope had devoted 18 hours to searching with no success. The personnel were worn out. The vessel had fallen behind the escort formation she was assigned to accompany. Renown, a battle cruiser, lay somewhere beyond the horizon. Glowworm was attempting to rejoin the group when a lookout detected smoke at 0800 hours. 2 German destroyers became visible: Z-11 Bernd von Arnim and Z-18 Hans Ludemann. They were brimming with invasion soldiers travelling toward Trondheim. They were components of Operation Weserübung. The German invasion of Norway was underway at this very moment, and Roope had stumbled upon it unexpectedly. Glowworm commenced firing at 8,000 yards. The German destroyers responded with gunfire, then headed northward, retreating. Roope recognized their intent. They were drawing him toward something more formidable, yet he pursued them regardless. If substantial German naval forces were operating in the area, the Admiralty needed notification. He dispatched a contact signal, then maintained pursuit. The conditions were severe: 30-foot waves, violent wind sweeping the deck. Glowworm was pitching so violently that personnel were being thrown against internal walls. 2 additional sailors were swept overboard. The vessel's gyroscopic compass became inoperative. Navigation relied on the magnetic compass during a blizzard. Then, at 9:50, the fog briefly parted for roughly 30 seconds. Admiral Hipper materialized less than 10,000 yards distant, imposing, state-of-the-art, swift. She represented one of Germany's most recently constructed heavy cruisers. Her 8-inch batteries possessed the capability to perforate Glowworm's thin hull like tissue. Her protective plating could withstand any projectile the destroyer might fire. Hipper's opening salvo struck 8 minutes later. Firing distance: 8,400 meters. The 4th volley connected with Glowworm's bridge. The fire control center was inundated. The forward 4.7-inch cannon sustained destruction. The communications center was destroyed. The commanding officer's quarters were obliterated. The mast descended and disabled the electrical circuits. Glowworm's alarm began sounding. It wailed continuously, would not cease. Roope created a smokescreen and altered course toward it. He gained himself roughly 90 seconds. He directed the torpedo crews to ready all 10 tubes. Glowworm transported 5 tube launchers, 2 sets of 5, each side of the hull. Newly manufactured design. The destroyer had served as the experimental vessel. To determine whether Roope's torpedoes might disable a vessel 10 times more massive, please tap that like button. This assists us in distributing additional accounts of maritime valor. Subscribe if you have not done so previously. Returning to Roope, as Glowworm emerged from the smoke cloud, Hipper maintained position. Firing range: under 800 meters. Near maximum range combat. The German cruiser's secondary weapons opened fire. 4.1-inch armaments, discharging as rapidly as crews could feed ammunition. Glowworm's machinery spaces absorbed impacts. Vapor pressure dropped, velocity decreased. Roope released all 10 torpedoes at approximately 400 yards distance, sufficiently near to observe personnel aboard Hipper's surface. Then he observed 10 phosphorescent trails advancing toward the massive steel hull. 1 nearly struck Hipper's bow. The remaining 9 did not connect. All 10. The cruiser maneuvered just enough. Each torpedo proceeded past without impact. Glowworm possessed 3 functioning cannons. Hipper possessed 20. The bridge had been destroyed. The engine rooms were being filled with water. Sailors were perishing in compartments Roope could not access. His vessel was disintegrating from shells heavier than his entire crew, and Roope reached a conclusion no commanding officer had arrived at in contemporary naval combat. He commanded hard starboard rudder, directed Glowworm's bow toward the towering cruiser, and commanded maximum throttle. Hipper's commanding officer observed it too tardy. Kapitan Zur, C. Helmuth, High attempted to angle his cruiser to initiate ramming first, but 14,000 tons does not obey the helm with the responsiveness of 1,350. The heavy cruiser remained pivoting when Glowworm covered the final 200 yards. All cannons aboard Glowworm capable of discharging continued firing. The siren persisted in its wailing. The vessel trailed smoke and burning material. Velocity had decreased to approximately 20 knots, though still accelerating. Roope remained on the remnants of his bridge and aligned toward Hipper's starboard side adjacent to an anchor. Contact occurred at 10:13. Glowworm's bow contacted the cruiser's armored belt and collapsed instantly. The complete forward section crumpled like paper, though the destroyer's forward velocity transmitted roughly 1,300 tons of metal forward along the cruiser's length, scraping, tearing, destroying. Approximately 100 feet of armor plating tore away. Hipper's forward port torpedo launcher was completely crushed and torn from its mount. 2 extensive fractures opened in the cruiser's hull beneath the surface. 1 German crew member was swept off the vessel by the destroyer's structure grinding by. 2 compartments started absorbing water immediately. Approximately 500 tons of seawater streamed into Hipper's forward areas before repair squads could seal the damage. The cruiser's fresh water supply fractured. Both primary tanks were punctured. Insufficient fresh water signified the boilers could not operate at maximum capacity within the day. Hipper started leaning toward the harbour, not catastrophically, though sufficient that High comprehended his vessel had suffered harm. Glowworm disengaged at 10:15. The destroyer's bow had vanished, simply vanished. The bow section terminated in crumpled material and exposed sections, though the machinery spaces remained operational. 1 cannon remained active. Petty Officer Walter Scott's team, manning the rear 4.7-inch gun, released 3 additional rounds toward Hipper from 400 yards distance. Hipper's secondary armaments replied, 20 guns directing fire at a target easily visible. Shells proceeded from rear to front along Glowworm's length. The rear cannon became silent. The engine compartments absorbed additional impacts. Vapor pressure disappeared entirely. All electrical power ceased. Flames started amidships. The furnace sections were taking on water. Personnel became trapped in areas filling with superheated vapor and liquid. Roope ordered the personnel to evacuate the ship at 10:17. The crew started departing over the edge into the Norwegian waters. The temperature of the ocean was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival duration under such temperatures was perhaps 20 minutes maximum. The sailors possessed life jackets, though insufficient time existed to deploy boats. They plunged into 30-foot swells. Glowworm was tilting significantly to port, her torpedo launchers submerged. She was burning from bow to stern. The remaining personnel climbed onto the inverted keel as the vessel capsized. Some departed the hull, others remained. Roope moved through them, securing life jackets to personnel, directing them into the ocean, ensuring they went over the higher side where the waves would not smash them against the hull. Then, at 10:24, the furnaces ruptured catastrophically. The explosion split Glowworm into pieces. The forward component that remained sank instantaneously. The rear section stood upright for roughly 15 seconds. Sailors continued gripping it, then it descended beneath the surface. 149 personnel had been aboard. 118 were presently in the water, perishing. High reached a determination that would mark him permanently. He commanded Admiral Hipper to halt in an active combat region with his vessel harmed, and taking on liquid with a British naval squadron somewhere beyond the visible horizon. He positioned his cruiser so the water current would transport survivors toward the vessel. Then he commanded all available personnel on deck. German crew members threw cordage and nets over the edge. Troops from the invasion detachment aided in retrieving personnel. The rescued individuals were drenched in petroleum, suffering from severe cold, utterly fatigued. Numerous individuals obtained rope but lacked the strength to maintain grip. Their extremities had become too frozen. Their physical capacity would not respond. They descended back into the ocean and disappeared. Hay personally entered the water, supporting his personnel. Observers witnessed him directing sailors toward the ropes, securing life jackets to crew who had departed without them. He represented among the last to approach Hipper's hull. German personnel cast him a rope. He grasped it. They started pulling him up the cruiser's side. He reached halfway up. Subsequently, his grip released. He descended into the Norwegian waters and vanished. 31 survivors reached Admiral Hipper's deck. Lieutenant Robert Ramsay was the sole commissioned officer. The remaining Glowworm sailors had perished. Hay requested the survivors be brought to his quarters, provided them meals, furnished them replacement attire. Subsequently, he accomplished something without precedent. He informed them their commanding officer exemplified a courageous individual, and he arranged to compose a message that would be transported via the International Red Cross toward London, suggesting that Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope considered for the Victoria Cross. Yet there existed something the rescued sailors remained unaware of at that moment, something that would not become apparent for 5 years. What Roope's action on that bridge had genuinely accomplished. Admiral Hipper limped into Trondheim harbour 12 hours following the collision. The harm appeared manageable when viewed from the pier. 100 feet of armour absent, torpedo launcher destroyed, 2 fractures sealed with improvised plates. The cruiser remained afloat, remained combat capable. German command deliberated regarding returning her to operations in days. Subsequently, the repair assessments were delivered. The collision had inflicted additional damage beyond missing plating. It had deformed internal structural components across 40 feet of the hull. The keel was bent. Stress fractures extended through multiple structural walls. Hipper's structure had been twisted by the strike, and the complete forward port division was compromised. She might remain buoyant. She remained incapable of combat. The Norwegian operation demanded all significant surface combatants. Germany had dispatched its complete naval forces. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau maintained the northern operations. Blücher had been destroyed by Norwegian coastal batteries in Oslo harbour on the identical day Glowworm perished. Lützow sustained harm. The maritime forces extended to their breaking point. Admiral Hipper was intended to supply firepower for the Trondheim operation, subsequently intercept British supply columns, then proceed to Germany for rearming and participation in the Atlantic raiding missions. Rather, she remained in Trondheim receiving provisional repairs while British forces consolidated positions in Norway. The cruiser departed Trondheim on April 14th, 6 days behind schedule. She proceeded not toward the Atlantic. She headed directly to Wilhelmshaven. The shipyard personnel there examined the harm and distributed their judgment. Hipper demanded complete structural restoration, fresh armor plate, fresh torpedo launcher, fresh bow portion manufacturing. The freshwater apparatus required complete reconstruction. The inventory continued. Hipper entered dry dock on April 20th. She remained there until July, 3 months total. Throughout those 3 months, the complete strategic atmosphere in the Atlantic shifted. British supply operations that Hipper was supposed to strike delivered their cargo securely. German naval raiders that Hipper was supposed to reinforce carried out missions independently. The cruiser, expected to constitute Germany's most productive commerce raider during mid-1940, remained within a shipyard instead. The consequence was tallied years afterward by naval historians. Hipper overlooked 4 significant convoy tasks. She overlooked opportunities to strike transport vessels heading to France. She overlooked providing support to Scharnhorst and Gneisenau throughout their Atlantic operations in June. One destroyer had taken a German heavy cruiser from active service for 90 days throughout the most urgent period of maritime conflict. Yet nobody in Britain recognized it. The 31 survivors were confined in German prisoner facilities. Lieutenant Ramsay was separated from the remaining sailors and held in an officer's detention facility. The ordinary crew members were distributed among 3 different installations. German command kept them segregated. Nobody understood what Hipper had become following the salvation. Nobody comprehended the cruiser had been removed from the battle. The Admiralty understood Glowworm had been destroyed. They comprehended she had battled enemy destroyers and a heavy cruiser. They possessed Roope's signal from 0958, subsequently nothing. The supposition was that Glowworm had perished in regular gun combat, overpowered by superior capability. The destruction was recorded. The vessel was catalogued as destroyed by hostile activity. The matter was archived. Roope's family obtained notification in May 1940. Absent and believed dead. Particulars unavailable. His spouse, Faith, obtained a message containing 12 words. The Navy delivered expressions of grief. There existed no reference to the collision, no reference to Hipper's harm, no reference to High's suggestion. That suggestion remained in a Red Cross facility in Switzerland, awaiting handling via diplomatic protocols that needed years throughout wartime. The survivors invested their complete detention, not comprehending whether anybody would learn what they had accomplished. Ramsay invested 5 years in detention, wondering whether the account of Glowworm's ultimate battle would vanish with him. The ordinary sailors invested 5 years, wondering whether their relations even comprehended they survived. German detention supervisors possessed no mandate to report prisoner status until following examination and documentation. Certain relatives did not obtain notification. Their relations continued living until 1941. Meanwhile, the conflict advanced. Norway fell, France fell, the Battle of Britain commenced, the bombing campaign commenced. Hundreds of vessels sank on each side, thousands of sailors perished at sea. Glowworm represented a single designation on a very extensive roster. And then something transpired that would resurrect the account. Something that would change a forgotten destroyer into an icon. However, it would demand 5 additional years. 5 years of concealment, while the personnel who possessed the information stayed in camps behind chain-link fencing, wondering whether Gerard Roope's sacrifice would gain recognition. May 8, 1945. Germany capitulated. The detention camps were liberated. Lieutenant Robert Ramsay departed Oflag, 7C in Bavaria, possessing just the attire he had on. 27 years old, 5 years incarcerated. The sole commissioned officer who endured HMS Glowworm. He got back to Britain on June 2nd. The Navy debriefed him for 3 days. They questioned him concerning detention circumstances, regarding German interrogation methods, regarding what military knowledge he might have obtained. Conventional questioning for returning prisoners. On the 5th day, Ramsay inquired when Lieutenant Commander Roope might receive his acknowledged honour. The Navy representative appeared perplexed. Recognition regarding what? Glowworm had perished, battling superior capability. Roope had carried out his responsibility. The vessel was listed as destroyed in standard military engagement. What form of recognition did Ramsay imagine was fitting? Ramsay conveyed what occurred. The collision, the destruction of Admiral Hipper, Roope's action to strike rather than withdraw, the German commanding officer's statements to the rescued sailors, High's commitment to endorse Roope for Britain's greatest military distinction. The Navy representative recorded it all. Subsequently informed Ramsay the Navy would examine the matter. The difficulty was substantiation. Ramsay constituted a solitary observer. The 30 remaining survivors were ordinary crew members distributed among different detention facilities. It would need considerable time to gather their narratives. German paperwork remained in disarray. The Navy's files were either ruined or taken by Soviet forces. Admiral Hipper's papers were absent. High himself remained missing. Nobody comprehended whether he had perished or was detained by Soviets or simply had not been catalogued yet. The Admiralty remained unconvinced. A destroyer striking a heavy cruiser did not align with established procedures. It sounded reckless. Perhaps Roope had become fearful. Perhaps the contact occurred unintentionally throughout the engagement. Ramsay's description had the contact transpiring once all torpedoes had been unsuccessful, once the vessel was damaged. That rendered it appear like self-destruction, not strategy. The Admiralty preferred honoured officers who complied with tradition, and there was political considerations. The war in Europe had concluded, yet the Pacific continued burning. Consideration concentrated on Japan. The Admiralty dealt with personnel separation. Hundreds of vessels, millions of individuals, the management structure was overwhelmed. A single destroyer destroyed 5 years previous represented low importance. Ramsay attempted an alternate strategy. He reached out to Roope's surviving spouse, Faith. Roope had existed 5 years without understanding how her partner had perished, simply absent and believed dead. Currently, Ramsay disclosed the reality: the collision, the salvation, the German commanding officer's esteem. She warranted knowledge. Faith Roope wrote to the Navy. She sought recognition regarding her partner's deeds. The Navy answered courteously. They might examine the matter should capacity become available. The correspondence entered a file containing thousands of comparable petitions from thousands of additional families. All wanted their partner or offspring or parent acknowledged. All maintained a story demonstrating bravery. The Navy could not manage them all. June transitioned to July. July transitioned to August. The atomic explosions detonated. Japan surrendered. The war concluded. Ramsay held on. The remaining survivors returned and delivered their recollections. 31 declarations, all consistent, all depicting the identical collision. The collision was deliberate. Roope had commanded it. The alarm persisted sounding. A single cannon persisted discharging. Hipper ceased operations to retrieve them, though still absent was German corroboration. Nobody had found High. Nobody had found Hipper's papers. The Navy maintained British observers, though lacked independent verification, and there remained an additional difficulty. Were the Navy to acknowledge Roope utilizing a posthumous Victoria Cross based purely on British statements, it might seem self-serving, like the UK was inventing honourable figures to offset the Norwegian collapse. September 1945, 6 months post-German defeat. The documents regarding Glowworm occupied a Navy workplace awaiting a development, some verification that might validate the description, some clarification that Ramsay's narrative had occurred, some substantiation that Roope's action occurred, and subsequently, in October, correspondence appeared in London. It had been processed via the International Red Cross in Switzerland, dispatched through diplomatic pathways that demanded months to authorize. Inscribed in August 1940 by a German maritime official, it had needed 5 years to arrive at the destination. The message was from Kapitan zur See Helmuth High, and it suggested that Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope get the Victoria Cross. The message was 5 years before, yet the words remained applicable. High had composed it on August 20th, 1940, a dozen days following the military engagement. He had forwarded it to the Navy via Red Cross channels. The diplomatic apparatus of wartime had postponed it for 5 years, yet presently it had gotten there. Hay's account was extensive. He portrayed the military engagement from Hipper's bridge, the fog, the German destroyers requesting assistance, Glowworm's action to follow, the weapons firing, 10 torpedoes sent at short distance, subsequently the collision. High explained that Roope had shown extraordinary bravery in battling a substantially superior warship, that his choice to ram was intentional and completed with precision, that the British officer had operated his vessel to its conclusion with outstanding gallantry. The message comprised technical specifics solely someone stationed at Hipper's bridge might comprehend. The distance when Glowworm emerged from the mist, the count of impacts registered on the destroyer, the location where Glowworm struck Hipper's hull, the severity of the destruction. High explained that his cruiser had demanded 90 days of reconstructive work, that the collision had prevented Admiral Hipper from remaining in battle throughout a vital interval, that a single destroyer had created what complete combat groups could not accomplish. Subsequently, High presented his suggestion. He maintained that Lieutenant Commander Roope's deeds satisfied all specifications for Britain's greatest military honour, that the bravery displayed warranted appreciation regardless of the result, that combatants on all sides must acknowledge outstanding gallantry when they see it. He appealed that British leadership examine Roope regarding the Victoria Cross. The Navy's Judicial Division reviewed the message for a pair of weeks. They authenticated the Red Cross certifications. They validated the signature matched High's pre-war documents. They compared the timeframes versus established chronologies. Every component correlated. The message was legitimate. On July 6, 1945, the Navy issued a directive in the London Gazette, the formal registry for British military honours. The article portrayed Glowworm's military engagement on April 8, 1940. It specified that comprehensive facts had just become obtainable. It maintained that Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roope got the Victoria Cross posthumously. The documentation explained the context. Glowworm proceeding independently in challenging conditions toward a meeting location, discovering and battling a pair of hostile destroyers, following them toward their reinforcing forces, spotting the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper approaching at high velocity, dispatching a hostile notification, operating the vessel to its finish against tremendous disadvantage, ultimately striking the adversary with remarkable composure and accuracy. The documentation did not specify that merely 31 individuals survived. It did not relate Roope perishing while assisting in the salvation of his sailors. It did not explain the 5-year postponement or the message from a German officer. Those specifics emerged afterwards in the thorough report. The formal documentation concentrated on the military engagement proper, the determination, the implementation, the expense. Roope transformed into the initial Victoria Cross awardee of the Second Global Conflict, not the earliest presented, the initial acquired, April 8, 1940, prior to the Dunkirk operation, prior to the Battle of Britain, prior to the bombing offensive, prior to the moment the majority recognized the period or seriousness the struggle would develop into. The initial individual to acquire Britain's greatest recognition in a conflict that might yield 181 additional, and he remained among merely 3 individuals in the complete war to obtain the Victoria Cross due to hostile suggestion. The remaining 2 instances comprised German commanders suggesting British aviators regarding outstanding bravery. Yet Roope was the initial, the starting point of a heritage stating bravery transcended nationality, that fighters might acknowledge bravery in their rivals, that respect persisted even in technologically sophisticated battle. Faith Roope obtained the medal on February 12, 1946, a presentation at Buckingham Royal Palace. Monarch George VI displayed the metal cross on its scarlet band. The ruler addressed briefly regarding Roope's bravery, regarding the sacrifice of Glowworm's personnel, regarding the responsibility owed to warriors fighting versus impossible circumstances. Faith maintained the medal throughout her existence. She passed away in 2001 at age 94. The Victoria Cross entered private hands. It is not displayed publicly. Most people remain unaware of its location currently. Identical to most individuals remain ignorant of the whole account of HMS Glowworm. However, there exists a single location that preserves it, a single location where the account remains living. The Norwegian territory of Koya sits approximately 60 kilometers to the northwest of Trondheim. Inhabitants in 1940 totaled 14. Maritime workers mostly, rugged landscape, no vegetation. The variety of location maps scarcely documented. The coordinates where HMS Glowworm descended are roughly 4 kilometers southwest of that territory, 64 degrees 27 moments northward, 6 degrees 28 moments eastward. The vessel rests in Norwegian jurisdiction, 240 meters downward. Frigid liquid preservation maintains the hull comparatively preserved. Norwegian authorities classified it a conflict memorial in 1995. Submersible operations forbidden, reclamation not permitted. 118 sailors stay underneath. Throughout 6 decades, nobody in Norway comprehended the narrative. The military engagement transpired throughout the turmoil of the German invasion. Norwegian armed forces fought in the southern regions. The minute inhabitants on Koya observed fog on the horizon that daybreak, detected distant explosions. Subsequently, nothing. German forces occupied the region days later. Nobody questioned. The maritime workers did not learn what they had observed till the conflict concluded. However, in 2024, Norway opted to build a landmark. The Norwegian administration, the Navy of Britain, survivor associations. They financed a monument on Koya, a rock tablet pointing toward the southwest coordinates, inscribed with the designations of all 149 personnel aboard. The inauguration was arranged for April 8, 2024, 84 years to the day. The landmark venture attracted attention the narrative had not gotten. Maritime specialists from Britain penned compositions. Norwegian publications detailed the military engagement thoroughly. Video recordings were produced. For the initial period, the thorough description achieved an extensive viewership. The collision, the salvation, High's message, the 5-year postponement, the Victoria Cross, all aspects. Historians located High's post-conflict documentation. He had persisted throughout the conflict, maintained command on Admiral Hipper till 1945. The cruiser executed multiple more Atlantic missions following the restoration, assaulted supply operations, participated in the naval combat of the Barents in December 1942, endured till the conclusion. High quit the maritime services in 1947, perished in 1970. He never disclosed his suggestion for Roope in public settings. His relations discovered the files after his passing. Admiral Hipper's situation was alternate. The cruiser endured the conflict, yet with difficulty. She endured bombardment multiple moments in maritime during 1945, severely damaged via air attacks in February and April. Upon German collapse, Hipper represented a blackened shell positioned on the base of Maritime Harbour. The British discovered her positioned there throughout the takeover. They extracted the wreck in 1948, segmented her for reprocessing, distributed the metal. Nothing persists besides movie records and several pieces in German maritime institutions. The 31 survivors dispersed following the conflict. The majority resumed regular occupations. A handful persisted in maritime service. Lieutenant Ramsay stayed on till 1952, ended with the grade of commander. He was present at numerous conferences of Glowworm personnel throughout the decades, supplied public presentations, guaranteed the narrative remained recorded. He passed away in 1989. The final survivor passed away in 2007. No replacement vessel got designated HMS Glowworm. The Navy maintains customs regarding reusing designations from vessels destroyed in battle. Vessels that expired fighting typically receive their designations given to additional ships, yet Glowworm never achieved a replacement. The designation perished alongside the vessel. Certain specialists believe it happened deliberately, that the Navy wanted that unique Glowworm to exist independently. The vessel that struck a cruiser, the vessel that obtained the initial Victoria Cross of the conflict. Maritime academics remain investigating the military engagement. It shows in resources concerning destroyer methodology, concerning judgment throughout hostilities, concerning circumstances, standard procedures, should be abandoned. The scenario stands unusual considering striking became outdated by 1940. The strategy belonged to the era of metal ships and resolute personnel. Nobody struck in contemporary battle. Munitions and missiles resolved engagements at measurements expressed in kilometers, not yards. Yet Roope maintained insufficient weaponry that might harm Hipper. His missiles did not connect. His vessel was failing. And he chose the earliest tactic in maritime battle, the least developed, the most straightforward. He directed his bow at the adversary and struck. The query investigated in maritime academies concerns whether it constituted the optimal action, whether striking represented strategically optimal or merely last desperation, whether Roope protected his personnel or forced them to perish. The reactions differ, yet all parties settle on something. It functioned. Roope possessed three possibilities once his missiles did not connect. He might capitulate, he might try to terminate contact and depart, or he might strike. Not a single choice was favorable. All of them perhaps concluded with Glowworm positioned on the ocean depths. Surrender intended, halting the vessel, displaying white cloth, permitting Hipper to come alongside, subsequently expecting the German forces would accept. Yet Glowworm represented a fighting vessel in a battle region throughout an active invasion. Roope had already sent a hostile notification identifying German important naval assets. He had discharged rounds at destroyers moving invasion warriors. Hipper could not tolerate receiving prisoners, not with British naval groups getting near. The cruiser might have destroyed Glowworm regardless. Surrender got no benefit. Departing implied pivoting away from Hipper and seeking to build range through fog. At maximum velocity in regular circumstances, Glowworm might produce 36 knots. Hipper might produce 32. The destroyer was speedier theoretically, yet Glowworm's machinery sections had absorbed harm. She produced 20 knots. Possibly Hipper might have gotten her in 10 minutes, subsequently completed her utilizing 8-inch weapons at substantial distance. Departing got opportunity to pass away gradually. Striking got an opportunity to harm the foe, not to continue. That occasion had elapsed once the primary 8-inch impact struck the bridge, yet to compel the Germans to compensate for Glowworm, to harm Hipper sufficiently that the cruiser might not persist operating, to eliminate her from battle, regardless if it required each individual aboard the destroyer. The computation was harsh. 149 UK personnel for 90 calendar days of German military functionality. A single destroyer for 3 calendar months of a heavy cruiser. The exchange proportion was detrimental in individual circumstances, yet tactically it succeeded. Hipper overlooked the complete Norwegian operations, overlooked the Atlantic missions, overlooked supply task operations. A single vessel collapse got 90 calendar days of a significant cruiser, yet Roope could not have comprehended that possibility. He could not have anticipated Hipper would need 90 calendar days in dry storage. He could not have anticipated the architectural destruction or the military repercussions. All he comprehended was his vessel was failing, and he might either expire uselessly or expire creating destruction. He chose destruction. The action displays understanding regarding direction throughout pressing circumstances, regarding what happens when procedure collapses, regarding what commanding officers accomplish when all alternatives are awful. Roope did not execute any guideline. There was not a method for striking in contemporary destroyer procedures. He formulated his action instantaneously while his vessel sustained destruction surrounding him. Certain specialists contend it represented tactical genius. Others label it gallant desperation. The reality is probably both. Roope discovered an possibility in the situation once Hipper surfaced from the fog. The distance was brief. The cruiser was sluggish to turn. The positioning supported striking. He executed the opportunity. Whether it reflected brilliance or desperation does not modify the finish. What is significant is that 118 sailors expired executing that determination. They did not get to determine. They did not get inquired. Roope gave the directive and the personnel obeyed because that is the thing maritime practice mandated. Certain of them almost certainly comprehended what striking represented. Others probably remained clueless till contact. Regardless, they continued at their assignments. The workers sustained the mechanisms operating. The gunners persisted discharging. Nobody quit their placement. That represents the section maritime academics emphasize. Not whether striking represented intelligent procedure, yet whether the personnel control in those circumstances portrays something meriting instruction. Whether contemporary maritime workers must realize that amount of dedication, whether that caliber of sacrifice carries importance in an age of advanced rockets and electronic systems and button-controlled hostilities, the answer the vast majority of educators supply is affirmative. Since innovation transforms, yet individuals remain unchanged. Vessels still deteriorate. Technologies still break down. Officers still encounter possibilities where all alternatives are dreadful. And in that situation, they want illustrations. They want to comprehend somebody else encountered awful selections and acted regardless. They want Gerard Roope. Yet there remains a single further query that solely the relatives might supply. Was it valuable? Faith Roope never supplied that query openly. She obtained the award. She was at commemorations. She maintained dialogue with rescued sailors. Yet she never expressed whether she considered her spouse's action was valuable for 118 existences. Certain queries lack responses families must be obligated to give. The rescued sailors possessed their replies. The vast majority of them expressed Roope executed what he had to, that the choice was dying for absence of purpose, that at least the striking created something. A minority disputed, thought Roope must have surrendered or departed, thought certain of them might have continued living as captives, yet even individuals that doubted the action never doubted Roope's bravery, never suggested he operated from something except responsibility. What remains certain is what might have been forfeited had Glowworm capitulated or been destroyed, not battling. The narrative might have terminated with a destroyer overpowered via superior capability, an insignificant reference in the Norwegian operations. Another designation on the harm listing. Nobody might have maintained the designation. Nobody might have built monuments. Maritime academies would not instruct the scenario. Alternatively, HMS Glowworm turned into something distinct, verification that compact vessels might harm large ones. That drive functioned as substantially as weapon capability, that the earliest procedure persisted functioning once all contemporary methods collapsed. The narrative persisted since it was extraordinary. Since Roope's action remained so unusual that his own adversaries experienced the obligation to record it. High's message guaranteed that absent German verification, the striking might have been overlooked as UK propaganda. Exaggeration, a narrative designed to render defeat seem glorious. Yet High supplied the reality, portrayed what he perceived, suggested his opposition for the greatest recognition. That operation of regard guaranteed the narrative might endure, and it maintained enduring. 84 years afterwards, individuals remain aware of HMS Glowworm, continue examining the military engagement, persist disputing Roope's action. The monument on Koya guarantees an approaching generation might acquire the designations of 149 sailors that proceeded into mist off Norway and did not get back. There exists a point in that, regarding how our culture honors conflicts. Most military engagements disappear in obscurity. Most vessels sink into overlooking. The majority of sailors that expire at sea maintain no trace outside kinfolk recollections, yet certain narratives endure. The extraordinary ones, the impossible ones, the ones depicting individuals executing things that seem beyond individual capability. Roope aimed a 1,300-ton destroyer at a 14,000-ton cruiser and gave the directive to ram. That action warrants recording, not since it was excellent procedure, not since it protected each person, yet since it embodied humanness, a personality in awful circumstances, and making the decision to react, choosing to harm the opposition, even if it meant all. If this narrative moved yourself the direction it moved ourselves, perform a service, engage that like toggle. Each individual like communicates to YouTube to distribute this narrative to increased audiences. Engage, subscribe, and switch on notifications. Our collective is salvaging overlooked narratives from dusty storage areas each individual daybreak, narratives regarding destroyer commanding officers and personnel that formulated awful selections, narratives regarding striking and bravery and sacrifice that the vast majority have remained unaware, genuine individuals, genuine heroism. Submit a reaction immediately and communicate where your position is. Are yourself positioned inside the United States, Kingdom of Britain, the Dominion of Canada, Land of Australia? Our membership stretches over the complete worldwide community. You're not merely an observer. You constitute a component maintaining these recollections sustained. Communicate your whereabouts. Communicate if a relative in yourself's household worked. Merely allow us to know you're situated. Much appreciated regarding observing. And thank you for creating certain Gerard Roope and his maritime personnel remain forgotten inside silence. These personnel merit recognition, and you are facilitating guarantee that.